Is it safe to come out yet? Are the Xenoblade fans who didn't watch or pay attention to the animation video and instead just yelled at me in the comments for daring to talk about the subject gone? Oh, they said such horrible, mean things. I'm scared to even show my face again for fear of continued retribution. At least it's easier to hide myself since I transformed into a Nopon when I made that Xenoblade Chronicles series recap video for Game Explain that everyone in my audience should go watch because I'm really proud of it. Yippee! The standard edition version of Xenoblade 3 that I was forced to buy because Nintendo doesn't know how to run an online store to save their lives! Wow, run-on sentences. It's time to game! So for those worried about spoilers, I promise you I will be keeping them to a minimum. Currently, I am 4 chapters in, and as such, I'll only be talking about my experience so far with the game. I won't be talking about any story specifics outside of maybe a few moments in chapters 1 and 2, and all the footage shown is from the first 3 chapters and nothing else. As some of you might know, while this channel is mostly focused on Atlas games, my favorite RPG is actually Xenoblade Chronicles 1. And outside of Xenoblade 2, which I only like, I've loved every single game in the series, from X to Torna to even Future Connected if you want to count that for some reason. And so far, Xenoblade 3 is looking to join those games, with it also having the potential to dethrone the original as my favorite RPG. From the moment I hit New Game, I was completely engrossed by everything it was showing me. The immaculately directed and choreographed cutscenes, the great, albeit at times cheesy voice acting, the dark subject matter, the beautiful yet melancholic world, and likely best of all, the entrancing music. Both my roommate and I were captivated as we watched the opening scene, soldiers desperately trying to kill each other for no reason other than to feed these hulking mechanical beasts, denying the enemy the ability to live just so they could continue to. At the core of the game is the theme of life, and it can be felt all throughout. Compared to past entries, conceptually it seems somewhat more generic, but Xenoblade Chronicles 3 tackles the subject in ways that I haven't really seen in a JRPG, at least not recently. Taking from films such as Starship Troopers and Logan's Run, the trauma experienced by the main party is explored in quiet, depressing, and real ways that makes everything feel so much more grounded than in past Xenoblade games, let alone Xeno games in general. The main party this time around are all made up of soldiers from 2 opposing sides of a war, who after gaining the ability to fuse and become creatures known as Ouroboros, attempt to make their way to a location called Sword March, all while being hunted down by their former nations. Compared to the first 2 games, this cast might not seem like they have as much personality, or just in general less interesting, and to that I don't really agree. I feel like that's not giving these characters enough credit. Noah, Lance, Uni, Mio, Tyon, and Senna are all fun characters in their own right. There just aren't a ton of over-the-top goofy moments like in past games. We don't get wacky hijinks, but instead we spend a lot of time with everyone and watch them slowly start to shed the conditioning their nations forced upon them from birth, eventually helping each other overcome the respective trauma from a life of nothing but killing. As they grow to trust one another and abandon the life they once lived, they let the walls they had built up drop and their real selves start to shine. It's a different way of handling characters than past games, and I think it's doing it beautifully so far. However, I do have some gripes. One of my favorite aspects of Xenoblade 1 and 2 is the various cultures you can find. Here, everything is much more homogenized. Instead of proper towns, you come across various military installations called colonies, and while they each have their own cool gimmick to help set them apart, they ultimately can look the same as each other regardless of whether it's from one nation or the other. Another issue I have is with this game's main Nopons, Riku and Manana, mainly in how little relevance it feels like they have. They're the only non-playable characters in the game who actually travel in the main party, and yet it feels like the story ignores them at times. It's not until Chapter 3 that they start to participate in battles, but prior to that, it can be easy to forget that they're even there. Hell, the game forgets they're there sometimes. There's one piece of dialogue in which they state there are 3 Agnians, completely ignoring Manana's existence. Unless you want to assume the Agnian they're leaving out is Mio, Tyon, or Senna, which, I mean, go for it. In terms of gameplay, Xenoblade Chronicles 3 is probably the closest Monolith Soft has come to matching the exploration paradise that is Xenoblade Chronicles X. For starters, the addition of a follow ball-like mechanic that takes you exactly where to go for whatever quest you have active is a godsend, eliminating frustrating moments where you're left wandering with no idea where to go or what to do. In terms of item collections, there have been a few ways they've done this in the past. I'm one of the few people who despise the field skill system in 2 and much prefer the item orbs of 1 and X. However, item orbs were also annoying in their own right as there were so few of them and their locations felt like they didn't matter half the time. 3 is able to fix both systems, making field skills a passive expansion of your exploration abilities, while item orbs not only make sense for their location, but the maps are completely littered with them. While the various regions of Ionios are sadly separated by loading screens, each one is utterly massive and broken up into multiple biomes. One minute you'll be wandering through a desert only to come out the other side of a canyon to a wide open grassland, before eventually climbing a cliffside and coming across a war-torn battlefield, all with no loading screen to separate them. What you'll find in these regions range from beautiful scenery to containers with items to the dead husks of fallen soldiers you can see off, to battles you can pick a side and join in on. Every moment spent running around the world felt rewarding and fun. However, sometimes it can feel a bit too big. With as much as this game takes from X, I really wish they brought back the sprint. It doesn't need to be the same speed as an X, but sometimes I really feel like moving just a little bit faster would be nice. If I had to sum up the combat system in 6 words, it would be Xenoblade 1 based, Xenoblade 2 improvements. It feels more akin to the former, but it comes with all the improvements the latter implemented, such as auto attack canceling. Combat is a ton of fun and is incredibly satisfying, but much like Xenoblade 2, the various mechanics of it are slowly rolled out the further and further into the game you get. Personally, I feel the pacing of the mechanical rollout and the accompanying tutorials is better than in 2, but early on it can make playing the game a bit of a slog. The first chapter, I was more so spurred on because of the incredible narrative and cutscenes than I was the combat. Not to mention, I'm confident that when Donkey makes his inevitable Xenoblade 3 video, he's going to really ape on how many tutorials there are. Luckily, by the time you finish Chapter 2, the game is much more engaging to play, and by the end of Chapter 3, it really feels like you're properly in the swing of things. Outside of the ability to swap playable characters mid-battle, which is a godsend, I love it, the 2 biggest additions to the games are heroes and classes. While all 6 members of your party are active at the same time, you can add an additional non-playable 7th member. The ones to fill that slot are called heroes, and they can be obtained through quests found either in the main story or in the world itself. Each hero comes with a class that you can change your party members to, giving them access to new arts and changing your party dynamic. By leveling up this class, you can unlock arts and skills that you can equip while playing as a class of the nation opposite of the hero the class originated from. I love the class system, and it reminds me a ton of the job system from old Final Fantasy games and the Bravely Default series. It takes a more traditional JRPG staple and puts a proper Xeno twist on it, allowing you to build your characters in any way you want. The hero system is also great, as it can help fill in certain roles in the party, freeing up the playable characters to experiment more with various classes and setups. I don't need to worry about having a class with a break art when I can have Riku and Manana handle that instead. Now, I do have a few other complaints that I feel are worth mentioning. The lack of heart-to-hearts is disappointing, but I feel it's somewhat made up for with the various cutscenes showing the characters bonding. It's like heart-to-hearts have been merged in with the main story as opposed to being disconnected moments of character development. And as someone who is openly critical of social links in Persona because of how it affects character development in the main plot, I'd be lying if I said I didn't miss them. Part of the fun was seeing the characters do something completely unrelated to the story, so to see them missing sucks. And to be fair, in past games, characters still got character development, it wasn't all just in the heart-to-hearts. They're also somewhat replaced by discussions at camp, but they're just not a good enough replacement, especially because they're not voiced like heart-to-hearts were in 2. Early on in the game, the Keves arts recharging via time can get tedious, especially when you unlock Agnes arts which recharge via auto attacks. The further into the game, the gap between them does start to diminish, to the point that it doesn't really even matter to me that much. But I hope Keves arts get buffed in the future. Have them do more damage or shorten their recharge time. I understand the point is that they can recharge while doing things that prevent you from auto-attacking, but the balancing is off just enough that I think they missed the mark. It's something a patch could fix, really. One thing the Xenoblade franchise is famous, or infamous for, is its incredibly quotable, memeable post-win dialogue. Frankly, there just aren't enough in 3, both in terms of memeability and in terms of not hearing the same damn quote over and over and over and over and over again. The only ones that stick out in my mind are Lanz wanting something meatier and Senna being the girl with the gall. I hope when the first real DLC pack drops, Monolith Soft takes the opportunity to add in more post-battle dialogue. The more quotable, the better. And finally, the frame rate can get really frustrating at times. Most of the time, it hovers around 30 FPS, but the game likes to dip down low when things get chaotic. It never ruins the experience, but the frame rate hitching can get seriously annoying. Xenoblade Chronicles 3 not only met my expectations, but it's also blown past them in a ton of ways. I love everything I have played so far, and the fact that I'm not even halfway through has me beyond excited for what I have left. This game is peak Monolith Soft, and I am dying to finish this video so I can get back to playing more. Well, now the only thing left to do is figure out how to get back to normal. Soul Hackers 2 is coming out soon, and I gotta be ready for, oh, okay, cool, everything's all good. Subscribe, please.